Welcome everyone to today's Ask an Expert webinar. We've got two of our Agilist experts here with us today because we're going to be talking about Agile scaling and some of the challenges that come with that, some of the tools that various scaling frameworks provide, and some of the lessons that we've gathered about how to make Agile scaling most effective. So we're excited for a heated conversation today. With us, we've got Adam Parker, who's got a passion for learning and leading high-performing teams. I can speak to that, definitely. I have experienced Adam's passion and really enjoy it. So he spent a lot of time in waterfall projects, but now has seen the light and learned the value of Agile, lean, and design thinking, and has brought that skill to many different industries. We've also got Betsy Lehman with us, who is a lean agilist with a strong background in systems engineering. And she's focused on enterprise transformation work, leadership coaching, and empowering autonomous teams. So I'm excited to have them both with us today. We're doing this as we have our other Ask an Expert webinars under the umbrella of Accela Labs, which is our outlet and incubation engine for the innovative work that we do, whether that's with regard to modern technologies, scaling, or all kinds of other creative activities that us Accelians get up to. So Labs is one of our windows through which we innovate, learn, and connect. So welcome, Betsy and Adam.
Thank you.
Thanks, Trent. All right, to kick us off today, I'm sure we'll get a number of different questions, but I did want to just start with, when you hear the term scaling in a business context, particularly with your Agile backgrounds, what does it make you think of? And Adam, how about you go first?
So we're not talking about scaling, right? Although,
well, that was intentionally an open-ended question. So if that's the first thing that comes to mind, you know, I know some of us, given the pandemic, are getting a little less exercise than we used to. I certainly am.
The pants I put on today were a little tighter than I would prefer. Let's just leave it there. But, you know, scaling, I mean, now back to reality here, right? What scaling comes to mind for me is, it can mean a lot of different things to different people, which I think this is a great opening question. I think for me, scaling is anything greater than one team. I think just that opens a whole world of conversation. What about you, Betsy?
Well, I don't like to start off sounding as a pessimist because that's not really my nature, but I have found in my experience that when someone talks about scaling within an organization, it means there is a focus to change and not always healthy. So sometimes it's like, oh, we've got to get bigger, we've got to get better, we've got to go faster with this. So I always try to turn it to the positive and to talk about, okay, where did your idea come from? Who's doing well with what? So sometimes it can be a little bit, let's go faster, and we don't really know how.
Wow, that gives us a lot of pathways that we could go down. Adam, let's turn back to you. So scaling is anything more than one team. What are some of the things that you've got to be aware of if you're going to grow beyond an established team? Let's say you've got a team, one team is doing Agile pretty well in their context, and someone says, to draw in some of Betsy's ideas, hey, we want some of that. We want more of that. Let's spread it. Let's go bigger. Let's go faster. Make it happen. If somebody comes to you and says things like that, how do you react?
I take a breath, and you know, Betsy asked some good questions there, but you know, the premise for me is what you're doing currently healthy with one team? Because if you're gonna grow, and I'm not saying it has to be perfect, I'm saying it has to be healthy. Because when you scale things, it really just makes those challenges harder, not easier.
I like that framing, healthy. Betsy, what do you think of that?
Yeah, and healthy is important, and the most and the biggest of those challenges is healthy for our customer. What are we scaling around? What are we trying to deliver? So that's where we can, one of the things that we get asked to do a lot to kick off or to start this process for our clients is to look at value stream mapping. And so I will probably won't go into a whole training session on that, but just to say that the value stream is how you're going to deliver value to your client. And that's always got to be your starting point, and understand what you want to do differently, or what you want to do more of if it's going well, to deliver value, high quality value more often.
I wanted to swoon. I wanted to swoon when she said value stream mapping. It made the lean part of me smile on the inside.
Yeah, well, don't think I'm not going to pull on that thread a little bit. Yes, value stream mapping. Okay, that's a tool. Right now we're on to a tool. I know SAFe talks about value stream mapping as a way to begin to understand what release trains ought to look like or how they ought to be structured. So how have the two of you used or approached the concept of value streams to make a scaling effort more effective, easier, or more healthy, to get back to that term?
I'll let Betsy begin.
All right, I'll jump in there. So one of the concepts about value streams that I really appreciate from the SAFe models is that they're really focused around a set of solutions. So often if we're talking about scaling, we're talking about value streams, it's not going to be just one product that we deliver to our client. So it can be a set of products, it can be systems, it can be capabilities. So that's where I like to focus first is what are we actually trying to deliver, and to understand in that that SAFe context, what's the complexity? Because I wish it was always as simple as we have a single product that we're trying to improve or get out the door, but usually when we're scaling, it's much more complicated.
Value stream mapping. I agree with Betsy. Like, I want to do a whole AMA on value stream mapping. So I guess Trent's like busily writing down, like, Adam just committed to another AMA. Great. I think, to add to what Betsy rightfully said, I think one of the values of doing value stream mapping, is to get the group, if it's not already, thinking about breaking down these silos that often increase the amount of handoffs in an organization that you will, this is not, I'm going to take a step back for a second, right? You're trying to improve the situation where you are. And there are good things that can happen. Having one Agile team or having a couple Agile teams, you can create a lot of good value there, but you're going to be limited if you're living in those silos. And so value stream mapping is just a powerful activity to get people to start to visualize, wow, I know these silos exist, but I just kind of ignore them. And you can ignore them. If you're really going to scale in the way that I think many people think about scaling, where you're thinking like large transformations, right, which is one kind of scaling, it's an eye-opener.
I like that. So value stream mapping can help us understand the scope of delivery, what we might want to be concerned about when we talk about scaling. So what are all the different teams or the products or the other things that we're providing to a customer to capture the value that we're trying to achieve? And Adam, I really like the point that you made, and I want to pick at that a little bit about it's a way to break down silos. Absolutely, right? We can visualize the value stream. We can understand where handoffs exist. We can create more empathy between different organizational functions. I think there might be an interesting dichotomy there between, like, if let's go back to our single Agile team that we want to spread the health of. Often that has worked because we've got a nice boundary around it. Once you start knocking down the silos, that boundary may disappear. How, as you reach that tipping point, going from a single team to all this now, how do you Sorry, I'm getting some messages about my sound not working quite right, so I hope you can hear me. How do you ensure that you can keep that health while at the same time bring it to the organization rather than it going the other way, the lack of health or whatever it is that is less desirable going back into the team?
I want to get my plug in here for Paul Booz. He's not paying me for this statement, but keep in mind that these are people, not resources. And I think it's easy to get excited about scaling and to think about just, I'm gonna move these teams and from one day to another without really having a conversation about that change.
Yeah, and I think the other piece that's really important is starting with leadership. So do you have leaders that are ready for this scaling exercise? And again, yes, we probably have them originally. We maybe even discovered them, might have found some great people that had these leadership skills that were sort of under the surface, and they really came out because of lean agile practices. But now you have to be a little bit more thoughtful and intentional with the leaders. There are very certain, and now I am definitely talking SAFE here. SAFE has a great leadership training program and does, expect or suggest that you start with training those leaders, and then they can start to really embody that mindset and show it off, and my favorite, walk the walk. And the other aspect I think that's important to that I've seen time and time again is, I'm really talking about the quote unquote middle management as leaders. And why that's so important is that group sometimes gets left out. They're not really team members, but they're not really the overarching, enterprise leadership. So that's that sweet spot to focus and to get those people like ready to go, ready to, really make this happen.
And that's where people are going to turn to, when they have questions. It's happening in my project today, right? There's a change coming. Who are you going to reach to first? I mean, it's great if you have an organization where you have access to senior leadership and you have the psychological safety to ask that question. But more often than not, either because of scale or because that lack of safety, they're going to those middle managers first for those answers. And if you don't have them on the bus too, that can cause some challenges.
I really like the acknowledgement that it's about people, that there's a very human aspect to this, because this is change in the way of working. Just a little bit of a plug for an article we recently published as a blog post by one of our change management experts named Carr that talks about the importance of change management, or that discipline anyway, to an agile transformation. And I think both of you were speaking to that. Middle managers are a great topic. Adam and Betsy, I think you're both right. They're extremely important. They are, in many ways, the glue that can hold an organization together, or fail to, if they are not creating the kind of safety you alluded to, Adam. So SAFE provides great training for them. What do some of the other frameworks provide, like large-scale Scrum and Scrum at Scale? We've got some experience with those, right? And then how are middle managers treated in those? Adam, do you want to start?
Yeah, and I'm glad you pivoted there, because I was about to throw up a sign saying we just said SAFE 3 times in the last 5 minutes. So we're going to have to explain this at some point, or we're going to have to pay royalties. So, I think, so I want to be transparent, right? I think at first glance, my reaction to SAFE was underwhelmed. And I think that some of that does have to come from my history of doing waterfall projects. Again, that's a whole conversation we don't have to have today about, I don't think waterfall is bad. I just don't think it's appropriate.
I do want to ask though, Adam, when about was that? Because SAFE has existed for a number
When
of
did I
different years.
pivot, or when did I get my first reaction?
The first reaction to SAFe, sort of the,
Gosh, I want to say 5 years ago now.
Okay.
And I'm actually just on my first SAFe implementation or project. I've followed them before, but I've never been on one. But I in the last year, I've definitely had more of an appreciation for I think it's evolved a lot. And there's a lot of lean concepts like value stream mapping that to me resonate strongly, that I think maybe get a little lost in the big map of SAFe. But your question was, what else? And so the what else is, and Betsy, I will let you talk here at a point. I think less is probably the one I'm most comfortable with and speaks to me the most. It doesn't prescribe a lot of the activities that maybe a SAFe does. And I think this is probably true in my experience at Scrum at Scale. It's not that it doesn't encourage a lot of the same things or that they're not founded in the same roots. It's that these other models leave more room for interpretation, for you to bring whatever tools or frameworks are useful to you to solve the problem. Where I think, kind of like we were talking about people, you're going through a change. Some people, you say, hey, here is, I send you to less training. You think there are a lot of gaps in it. It paralyzes you, right? The freedom is paralyzing. And I think that's why some people find SAFe more attractive, is because it kind of checks all the boxes. They can kind of get their idea around it. They're comfortable with those constraints. So that's a big picture kind of thesis. I don't know if I answered directly your question, though, Trent.
I think you did a good job. Betsy, what do you think?
Other than SAFe, my experience has been with, I'm going to say no, no framework or personal development framework, or a company, an enterprise, kind of putting together their own. And what usually happens in those cases is that they're just allowing Agile, Scrum, Kanban to happen at the team level. And they're letting it percolate a little bit, things like communities of practice. Let's bring each other together. But one example I had of that was really successful, and SAFe does address this in some of its framework, is that if you're dealing with a hierarchical organization, that's not going to stop being a hierarchical organization. So finance is a good example of that, manufacturing, sometimes even just anything that's a huge enterprise organization. And one example I saw that worked really well, it was a very simple concept, was they had to stick with that hierarchy, and they did, but they built teams at each level. So they really got the team concept. And so their leaders weren't kind of on their own trying to figure out how to manage these teams. They were actually formed up. And the client that I worked with at the time, they used their own nomenclature was product lines and product groups. Very, very simple concept, and it really worked well. And so I think sometimes this can happen a little bit more organically or without being completely prescriptive. The one key I'll say to this, though, is you're gonna have, and this might get us onto a different level or not, is they still have to look at funding and governance. Those are the two things that a lot of organizations think they're never going to change, or they're never going to have to change. And they, to me, they're the two things that homegrown solution has to include.
Otherwise, you're constantly trying to adapt your agile organism, your scaled organism, to these other things. And again, I don't think that's wrong, right? If that's working, then great. It just means you're in the concept, that company is not getting maybe the maximal benefit because you're having this transaction cost of talking between one way of working and another.
I want to repeat some of what you said, Betsy, just to make sure that I understand it, to draw it out a little bit. You said there was an organization that you worked with that was, invested in a hierarchy or accustomed to working with a certain hierarchy, but they figured out how to make it more compatible with Agile by using certain concepts that were, sort of their own terms. But if, essentially what that did was establish boundaries within the hierarchy that would allow a scope for agility with the authority for certain managers within that hierarchy. Is that sort of a right way to understand it?
Yeah, and it really acknowledged and brought to the forefront the technical leadership. So it was a technical company doing technical work, and so they understood that those technical leaders at those higher levels were crucial to the success when these products and value streams were rolled up. You're going to have to roll up and report and assess and deliver at a higher level. So yeah, that's just what it was.
Did they deliberately borrow anything from any of the established frameworks, or did they grow that themselves?
No, they definitely borrowed from the established frameworks without completely adopting them. And the one that they used frequently, and they used it well, and a lot of organizations have done this, is SAFE's concept of program increment planning, or the program increment and then planning. So PI planning, a lot of it. I think the other frameworks might just call it big room planning, but it's a great concept. As Adam mentioned earlier, when you're going to start breaking down those silos, one of the best ways to do that is get all the silos in a room together and try to talk about what's coming next. And that doesn't take, 45 minutes or an hour. Those events are likely, days, but they're very, very helpful for everyone to start to see where the other programs are going, what they're doing, and how you're going to have to align with each other.
Adam, a few minutes ago, you used what I think of as a nice lean term, the transaction cost. So talking about the interface between the agile part of an organization and maybe the not so agile part of an organization. That brings back this concept of interfaces. Do you think something like a big room planning or program increment planning is an example, or could be an example of that kind of thing? And if not, what sorts of interfaces do you have in mind?
So I want to tie this back to value stream mapping, right? Value stream mapping in and of itself, we can use all the time, right? That you can use it at your team level, you can look at it at a more macro level. But when I think about lean, right, and not just lean agile, but like lean transformation, right? You might do something called a value stream analysis, which is like a parent, and it's very much a big room planning type experience, similar to PI planning, where you get everybody in the room. Often you're planning for a year instead of PI planning. You're planning for an increment, which might be 3 months, right? In value stream analysis, you're looking at that whole customer value stream, and you're going to say, all right, during the year, here's some things we're going to try to fix, and then we're going to have tiger teams that go off and do those Kaizen at different points of the year, because you're trying to achieve these macro changes. So I think that these sessions are not only good for breaking down silos, but it breaks you away from the operation day to day, and everybody says, take a breath, let's look at this together, let's set a plan. Right? I know planning is so scary in Agile. Let's have a plan, right? And then that way we know what we're marching to as these things, as things evolve, right? We have to have that structure. Doesn't mean we're committed to the plan, but it's one of my favorite quotes, and I'm going to just butcher it, but I'm going to go for it. President Eisenhower, right, is, planning is everything, but plans are nothing. I know I'm getting that kind of wrong, but it's the action of planning together, having that conversation, having, you should leave a visual, have a visual for these things. Because these are the kind of touch points that allow you to pull people back together, as when you leave that room and you start to stray, and there's this transaction cost, right, of having these conversations to have this touchstone to bring everybody back to. So it's
Yeah.
it's one kind of interface.
I like what you did with that a lot. And you're right. I mean, you got the gist of Eisenhower's quote, right? About, how plans themselves aren't very valuable, but the activity of planning is invaluable, right?
So important.
And I think that's a great point. I want the two of you to talk more about that in terms of scale, and maybe you've already kind of hit on one of the most important points, which I think is get people together, collaboratively create the plan, and now we have a sense of how to move forward together, and that lends some level of cohesion as you go forward. But how does planning, or how do you think planning changes as you go from a single team and the health there and try to spread that health to multiple teams that are interworking or collaborating together? Betsy, what do you think?
I think the best part of that is that the awareness, I think this is a good word, that all of the different groups, come to about each other. They know what other groups are doing. They start to understand it. They don't need to know it in depth, but they get to see it. And we can talk about other ways that you share demos and things like that. But they get an awareness around what the other teams are working on, which of course is important for things like dependencies and even prioritization. But that awareness allows them, again, now I'm kind of thinking the senior leadership level, allows them to make decisions together as a team for what's most important to the organization, as opposed to, and this is one of my waterfall annoyances, is I feel like in waterfall, the squeaky wheel, or like to say dire straits, like the person that can come up with the worst case scenario if their funding is cut, or their team members are no longer available to them. And when you can turn that on its head and say, as a team, what do you say is most important for the organization? And as a quick note on that, I think it was the moment that I really believed in scaling. It's about 8 years ago for me, and I was the director level, fighting out exactly what I'm talking about, resource allocations and things like that. And we were all within the scaling framework at this point. Our VPs got wind of that, and they very quickly said, "Oh, you guys should stop arguing about this. We're going to meet once a week for 15 minutes, and we'll decide you just let us know if you've got an issue like this, and we'll decide for you." And we all thought we weren't doing our job, and you're supposed to push these decisions down. It turned out they were exactly right, and they were doing the right thing. And then in 15 minutes, they were making here's what's most important to the organization, and here's why. And they would let us know. And then now we're all educated, not just on each other's work and what's happening, but really getting a real live usage of what our strategy was, what our priorities were at that executive level. So I really think that can make a huge difference in how the interactions go on.
Did the emotion wash over you, like, as you had this realization?
It did. It's just like the first time I heard Steve Jobs talk. I was an Apple person for the rest of my life.
Betsy, you make me think about this meeting, and it speaks to kind of like, it's different than the transaction cost I was talking about earlier, but decision latency. Like what you're describing there is, you want teams individuals, leaders to solve these problems themselves, but they might be playing with incomplete information, or you don't have the bandwidth because you're running the business. But so to have these touch points where you can reduce that, passing these things back and forth, the latency, getting an answer quickly and move on.
And make it at the right level. One of the things that I was really struck by with what you just described, Betsy, is you're right. Oftentimes we think, okay, we got to push these down, right? Make decisions at the right level. And usually the subtext of that is make them at a lower level because that's closer to the information, and we should be able to make the decision faster. But it sounded like you were talking about a situation where the group that you were with wasn't able or lacked the contextual knowledge to be able to make the decision quickly enough. And so, I'm sure you could frame your argument for why your priority was higher, and someone else who's arguing for a different perspective could do the same thing, and now it becomes very difficult to reconcile. So bubbling it up a level where they had better visibility and context was the right thing to do, right?
Yeah, and then you're focusing, right? So it doesn't mean items 3, 4, and 5 on the list aren't going to happen, but let's focus on 1 and 2 and get them done. And that's where you start to see the efficiency at scale, because all of a sudden you can say, hey, we are going to make this the first, I don't like the word priority either, the first in our sequence of work. And we're going to go take this on right now. And we are talking about, maybe it's a little bit the elephant in the room, is that when you're looking at an enterprise organization, you likely have some constrained resources, not people, actual resources. And so that's, usually what you're talking about. Sometimes it's the people to focus, but actually if you've got constrained resources, I don't think that trade-offs are necessarily the right way to go, because it usually means someone is giving up a little bit so someone else can get a little bit, and you're probably doing everything at a little bit of a subpar quality or excellence. So again, it's more this notion of, I like to think of it when you're being polite and you say, oh no, you can go in front of me. You look like you're in a hurry, or you have less groceries. It's a great analogy because, hey, can we get this? It gets into some more of our complicated math behind some of these things. But if you can get something done quickly, if we can focus and get that thing done and out the door, and now our customer's happy. Those are some of the things, again, that you can do at the proper level where all the information is known. Absolutely.
This sounds like a very difficult puzzle, though. How do you, or what techniques are out there, whether from the scaling frameworks or other experiences that you've had, to help an organization sort through where the right level is for the right kind of decision? Adam, what do you think?
I was going to say, ooh, call on me, Mr. Cotter. Mr. Cotter, call.
I saw you react.
I saw that too.
Yeah. So I have a simple one. Again, I'm going to go to my lean background, and I have a slide I like a lot, which is, the people doing the work, right, are the ones that know where there's waste, right? So there's a concept, at least that I was taught, about having eyes for blank, right? So people doing the work should have eyes for waste, right? How can we remove waste from our processes? It's a whole one concept. The next level up from that is that middle managers we were talking about earlier. And you want them to have eyes for flow, right? They can see maybe someone or some person, or separately some resource, as Betsy indicated earlier, right, is getting under or overutilized, or is a bottleneck, right? So managers having that eye for flow, and leaders having eyes for culture. And that's a paradigm I use when I talk to people to try to help understand how people should be moving around the space they work in.
So like an orientation, it's continuous improvement at each one of the different levels, but it's a different take on it.
Yeah, and I think this, if this is an organism, right, the organism needs to do certain activities to sustain itself. Everybody's got to have a job, and again, just like people think planning is, doesn't fit within the idea of Agile or scaling, it's false. It's also that Agile is a free-for-all, and everybody, we need T-shaped people, and everybody's going to do everything. And Betsy, you're going to be a BA today, and the Scrum Master tomorrow, and Trent, by the way, you're learning Java. Everybody needs to know their role, right? It doesn't mean that we won't want people that are flexible, but if you start to define some of these boundaries about what you're supposed to do and so on, it allows you that creativity, that freedom. Actually, it's the constraint gives you freedom. It's a little bit of a game.
Yeah, and back to what we were saying about, we could talk about value stream mapping for an hour. That originally, what you just said, it just lit off for me, like, oh yeah, those are, like, now you're sort of associating what we learn in value stream mapping to those different levels. That's great. The idea of, waste, flow, in culture. I think we could really apply that in a good way when we're showing our clients, here's what we want you to do with this information that you have just discerned for yourself.
Adam, you've highlighted a number of things now that are, I'm not sure exactly what to call them, maybe Agile mythologies or memes, right? Like, in the
Agile memes.
in the so like, we don't need plans, but you both have talked about the importance of plans and how they can provide focus and ensure the kind of contextual and awareness for better decision making. You were also talking about, people need to be T-shaped. There are a number of things that are sort of assumed with Agile, and one of those that often comes in is it is about hierarchy, and it's about, well, things ought to be flatter. There ought to be fewer people who are, or fewer layers perhaps. But yet you just pointed out how it's very important to, have different focuses, different constraints at different levels to ensure the kind of health that we're talking about. And Betsy, you were also making the point that, you've seen organizations relate their hierarchy to Agile concepts and make that work. And I think an ingredient to that is that focus, give the right focus at the right level. So where did the two of you come down in terms of hierarchy and scaling? How do those two work together, or where are they in conflict?
Sure, I'll jump in first. The water's great. I think when you're scaling, I think leaders often underestimate how much they themselves have to change. Mm-hmm. And I think that is an obstacle to scaling. I'm sorry, there's so many ideas going through my head. They're backing up.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. I think that you're onto something, right? Because one of the things that I think about is hierarchy isn't necessarily a challenge to making this work right. I think Betsy's experience speaks to that. I have my own experiences that speak to that. It's the attitude that you take toward the hierarchy, right? If you use the hierarchy as a way to help people, to go back to your analogy, team focus on waste, managers focus on flow, leaders focus on culture, then, the hierarchy is giving you an area to focus on. The hierarchy is acting as its own constraint. But that may necessitate change, to your point. People at different levels may not be ready to make the shift, to focus on the right things, to make the organization healthy from an Agile perspective.
You mean, I'm laughing because I'm thinking about change. We were talking about change management earlier. And I think I said within the last year, to me, like all of this is change management, like Agile, Lean, like maybe change management is the parent here in this. And in the hierarchy. Yeah, sorry, I should let Betsy go.
Well, I was going to say is one of the things I wanted to go back to is what Adam mentioned earlier about the hierarchy isn't a bad thing, and we don't have to flatten every organization as long as the different layers and levels are speaking to each other and are communicating and are meeting with each other. I think that in this, what we're talking here about scaling for agility, especially for business agility itself, is you have to have that open-mindedness of, I'm the CEO of the company, but I still really want to hear about what that one team member experienced recently when they had this great outcome with one of our difficult customers. And that's one of the things I think that changes, because if you scale in a healthy way, is that everyone is now truly moving towards the similar goals. To they're embracing the same principles and values, and that's that cultural shift where you have sort of a single culture. Because that's the other thing I find sometimes in enterprise organizations is you might have a very healthy, interesting, provocative, innovative culture at the team level, but that doesn't exist at the, say, the executive level. So I think that these two things really do go hand in hand. And it's just, I mean, I don't think it's feasible to say that a company with tens of thousands of employees is ever going to stop having a hierarchy. They do have to get the work done, but it can still be a really, really positive experience for all the different levels.
There, there was a chance to talk about some of this earlier, and now we're back in the same area, so I'm going to bring it up, right? People who are joining and asking questions here for us are, they're saying, all right, well, how do we tie this back to like a framework, right? So we've talked about less, we've talked a little bit about SAFe for Scrum at Scale, which is something I've been dipping my toe in more recently, separately, right? It has some concepts about like an executive action team, and which is kind of like, how does the Scrum mastering in the organization translate up, right? And we can talk about how all the fun little shapes or fractals. I think Trent, you used that word once. I like that. But that's the mechanism for hierarchy to tie all these things together from the Scrum Master side, because in Scrum at Scale, they talk about kind of a Scrum Master loop and a product owner loop. And then for that product owner hierarchy, in terms of structure, not roles, but they've got the executive meta Scrum. And that's where those things get answered. So I wanted to just quickly, Trent, tie us back to some of the tenets of these frameworks, because I thought that might be helpful.
I think that's great. Thank you, Adam. Because that explains something that, Betsy, I think you were getting to. What I heard, I don't think you used this word, but you were talking about how important it is for pieces of the hierarchy to communicate with each other. So what that got me thinking about was, well, it's not so much the structure that you choose, it's the connective tissue that holds it together that really enables the scaling to be effective or to mesh well and be healthy with the hierarchy. And Adam, you were just pointing that out. You're talking about some of the, I don't know well enough to say for sure. Well, I probably do, but anyway,
You stayed at a Holiday Inn Express last night, so
I want to give you a chance to comment on this. It seems like Scrum at Scale does a very good job at that in terms of defining what the connective tissue ought to look like with those different hierarchies, right? The product owner loop and the sort of the Scrum Master loop that you described. It talks about how to connect the different layers of the organization together in a way that is intended to be fractal, as you said, or scale free. I think that's pretty powerful as we think about this question of hierarchy and how they tie together.
And I think that's one of the things that Scrum at Scale does best, at least not that it's better than the other ones we talked about. I just mean in terms of when you go to their website and you read their guide, right? That's the one that kind of highlights that particular communication dynamic most. And I think that when we're talking about scaling, communication paths are the part that gets overlooked in a lot of these diagrams. And again, going back to my point about just waiting for the dollars to roll in here online, but that these are people, not resources. Like these communication paths are really what make you successful or not successful. It's maybe not the only thing, but it is a critical one.
That's it. Oh, okay. I want to go back or bring back a term that the two of you have been using a good bit, because we've laid it out there, but I think it has implications that we haven't really explored. And Betsy, I think you first used it. You were talking about organic, sort of or organic scaling approach, driven by the context of the organization. And then Adam, you used the term organism to describe the healthy, agile pieces of an organization. So this is, you're very deliberately, I think, choosing this organic terminology, talking about growth in terms of scaling, alluding to the organization more as a biological organism than a machine. traditionally, I think we think about them as machines. We think about manufacturing lines sometimes from a lean concept in terms of factory analogies. I know that's used in software sometimes. What are the implications of this mindset that you both seem to have adopted, or the perspective of scaling being more of an organic problem?
Yeah, I think I get that from this focus on customers, right? And what do our customers want? They're people. And I don't think I cannot remember ever experience of having an inorganic customer or a reason that well, I take that back.
Our AI overlords tell us.
I have delivered product to automobiles before, but there's still customers that are going to use them. So I think this customer centric focus is what's kind of brought, I'm really going out on a limb here, but kind of brought the humanity back to our business organizations. And I think it's that notion or some of those notions like empathy and what does the customer really want? What does the customer really need? And I see it as a really positive sort of psychological change that we are stopping referring to ourselves as resources. We're people. But in kind of in summary, we're people with great ideas and great talent. And that's what our organization is made of. And so that's where I think, and we're delivering to people. So that's what is really helps me to start to understand that we aren't, thank goodness, we're not really cogs in a wheel. It is this idea that together as, innovative and collaborative groups of people, we're making up this living organization.
I feel like I should have like a graphic that pops up here as I'm about to say lean things. But like customer, right? There's, voice to the customer, and that's always going through that conversation with groups is always fun because you get into, well, who is our customer, right? And that's another conversation we could have that's really fun. But in terms of treating it like an organism, right? We talk about continuous improvement, right? It's not by accident, right? There's no real stasis, right? There is now, and then there's what happened before and what happened after. And so, as any organism, it's got to constantly, even if it's a machine, right? You got to oil that machine, you got to service it so that it can be sustainable over the long run. And so, you got to think about that organism is going to change and evolve, and what worked yesterday may not be what works tomorrow. And so it's helpful to think about it that way. And if I'm going to extend that analogy further, and like if you read Team of Teams, the concept of a leader as a gardener, I really like that, where you're constantly, through attrition of some kind, the people are going to change as well. And so you can't think about it as, well, I've got Betsy exactly where I want her and she's going to be there forever. I'm constantly going to have to think about, how do I build up or find and keep within that boundary of our culture, that bubble of our organism, to keep us growing and evolving, because it never stops. I think that's the thing about transformations, is people think, well, I'm done. You're really never done.
I like that point a lot. So you said Team of Teams, just to make sure everybody knows, it's a book. Here's the book. Just happen to have it in reach.
I would hold up my Kindle, but I don't think that's as helpful.
So there's a concept which embraces what you're talking about, Adam. This idea of, it's not just continuous improvement, but it requires constant attention, sort of a continual evolution or re-evolution. And I've heard biologists and other theorists use something that is called evolutionary potential. So what is the potential for change or evolution? And I think you can apply that to an organization. And let's tie that back to the scaling frameworks. How do you think the different scaling frameworks that are available today support this concept of a continuous improvement, continuous evolution, not just at the level of a team, but as an organization that is progressing on its scaling journey and continually trying to either get more healthy or remain so.
So I'm going to use what I now feel like is one of my favorite safe isms. But it doesn't sound very safe-ish. If I didn't say that, you probably would have thought it came from a book or something. But it gets into this notion of danger versus fear. So, and I really like this concept, and I had never thought about the difference between those two words, is that if we think of ourselves as you know, as I'm going to say developers, and I don't just mean software developers, but product developers, you know, developing for our customers. If we feel like we're always, you know, in danger, then we're always looking to improve and to innovate and to get out of the situation. And we've got to learn, right? So, you know, we're in a dangerous situation, so let's correct it. And why I like that versus fear is, to me, fear is I'm frozen, there's nothing I can do. And I'm just gonna, and this reminds me of a lot of organizations that didn't survive. So sadly, my favorite is Kodak, because I was a big, you know, Kodak fan back in the day. They didn't figure out how to, they froze. They didn't see the danger, you know, writing on the wall, and they didn't change. So I think that's the fact that these frameworks, and especially something as I think a lot of people would call safe rigid, something as rigid as safe is actually coming to those kinds of terms and explaining this in those ways so that you can think about business agility, how you actually operate in your day-to-day life, and applying, being allowed to, you know, have the room to apply how you would react to things in your regular life, and react to them that way at work, and be able to start. My favorite thought there is like, and shout out, like, we're in danger, this is what we have to do. So that's where I think we're starting to see a much more humanistic side to the big frameworks.
I really like fear, and I've had to pluck this Post-it note off my little wall of Post-it notes here because I'm a big Tim Ferriss podcast fan, and he had someone on, a poet actually recently by the name of Mary Carr, and she was talking about something else entirely. But I, you know, because I'm an agilist, like I just see lean and agile in everything I listen to. And the quote I wrote down was talked about fear. And the quote was, the problem isn't the thing your mind is telling you. The problem is the fear. And for me, this is Mary Carr, the person speaking, for her, right? The solution to fear is curiosity and presence. And I can't be terrified and curious at the same time. And I think that's like, I really liked what you were saying, because it separate that sense of danger and like, what can I do versus fear, which is paralyzing. I think she's getting at the same idea, which is we need to move through these situations, and being afraid of them isn't going to help. And so, you know, Trent, to your point, is that there is no stasis, things are going to change. And so as a business that wants to continue to survive and thrive, they can't be afraid of these changes.
Very solid.
So Adam Parker, internet poet. No.
You need a podcast.
Well, we are just about out of time. I do want to give each of you a chance to make any points that you think are extremely important that you haven't had an opportunity to speak to yet before we close. Adam, we began with you, so we can sort of begin the ending with you.
This is like my actor's studio moment. Like, what's my favorite curse word? But we're not going to do that. I think when it comes to scaling, I think that the takeaway I want people to have is that be open, but also be intentional. right? It's okay to have a plan. It's okay to have goals. We're going to do this transformation, but be open to the fact that your plan is going to have to change. And maybe even the framework you choose is not the right framework for your situation. Maybe the framework that worked well for you at a prior situation is not the one in your new situation.
Very good.
Yeah, it's absolutely right. Is everything we say about business agility is encompassed in what we're doing, and the fact that we do have to look at it as, you know, continuous exploration, continuous integration. We can say those things about our products, but we also in our value streams and all the other things they roll up to at the scaled level. But I think that it's to kind of to go off of exactly what Adam said, is you've got to be ready to just keep trying new things and in changing what you're doing. I just learned that SAFe now has an assessment that has, oh, I want to say 60 items in it or something. The 60, like checking the box on 60 items is not the goal, but the fact that there's multiple frameworks and that they have all these levels and all these ideas and techniques and elements is that's the good part. So don't be scared away by any of the frameworks. Just keep trying new things and keep asking people what they've tried, because I learn more from asking other people how they've approached a situation or how they've done it than I do, obviously, that I can possibly ever learn on my own, just experiencing them. So share and ask.
Yeah, to that point, I do want to put a little bit of a mention in for the manifesto for scaling agility, which some of us Accellians worked on. We link to it on Labs, and it's also available out there in a GitHub repository because we've opened it up. And that's a good resource to check, as well as the different scaling frameworks. Cool. Well, thank you very much. For me, this is a very stimulating conversation. I enjoyed it, and I hope those who joined us enjoyed it as well. We'll be posting this on the website soon, and look for additional Ask an Expert. Very nice, Adam. Ask an Expert.
Happy holidays, everybody.
In the future. Yes. Thank you.